No one dared challenge him, until the night I realized I was the only one who could. I'm staring at the digital clock on my bedside table. 3:14 a.m. I don't reach for the lamp because I know the light won't turn on unless the system allows it. 6 months ago, my biggest stress was a short-staffed shift at Murphy's Diner. Now, my stress is the silent, red blink of a camera lens in the corner of my ceiling. I haven't answered a call from my sister in Detroit in 12 weeks. Not because I don't want to, but because my phone only connects to numbers he has pre-approved. I wear silk pajamas that cost more than my old car, but I didn't pick the color. I eat organic fruit delivered to my door every morning, but I never placed an order. This is my life now, a series of high-end restrictions designed to keep me safe. Before I even tell you what happened, let me ask you this. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted most? If you have, you'll feel this story deep in your soul. And if you know that kind of pain, hit subscribe. Not because it helps me, but because stories like this remind us that sometimes silence and strength are the best revenge. The man behind this gilded cage is Min Seo-jun. To the city, he's a philanthropist. To the underworld, he's a ghost. To me, he's the stranger I found bleeding in an alleyway who decided that since I saved his life, he now owned mine. He told me I was useful. He told me I was protected. But sitting here in the dark, I realize he never asked if I wanted to be either. Yesterday, I tried to walk 2 blocks past the grocery store he designated for me. I didn't get 10 feet before a black sedan pulled up, the window rolling down just enough for me to see a pair of cold eyes. No words were spoken. I just turned around and walked back. Every choice I no longer make is a brick in the wall he's built around me. But tonight, I found something. A ledger hidden in the back of the restaurant office, where he thinks I'm just listening without appearing to listen. I saw a name I recognized from my old life. I realized that this safety he's providing isn't for me. It's to keep me from finding out what he actually did to the people I used to love. She walked in, calm, unshaken, pointing at something only he would understand. His expression changed instantly. What happens in the next 90 seconds will shock you. Stay with me. I stood in the center of Seo-jun's private office at Luminous, holding a small, crumpled receipt from Murphy's Diner, the place he supposedly closed down for the staff's protection. Except the date on the receipt was from 2 days ago. He hadn't just fired my friends. He had relocated them into a different kind of labor. You lied, I whispered. My voice should have shaken, but it was cold. Seo-jun didn't look up from his desk immediately. When he did, his dark eyes were unreadable. I secured their futures, Jasmine. Just as I secured yours. You're being followed, Seo-jun, I said, ignoring his deflection. The man in the gray coat who comes into the restaurant at 6 p.m. every Tuesday? He isn't one of yours. And he wasn't looking at the menu. He was looking at the exit behind your chair. I had warned him once. As a waitress, you learn to see the things powerful men think are beneath them. You notice the way a hand lingers near a pocket, the way a gaze checks for cameras. I saw the danger coming for him before his own security team did. He laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, but it was dismissive. I have teams of men paid to worry about that, Jasmine. You should go back to your apartment. Your favorite tea was delivered an hour ago. He ignored me. He treated my observation like the rambling of a girl who didn't understand the real world. But 3 hours later, the silence of the restaurant was shattered by the sound of breaking glass and the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor. You know what hurts the most? Not what they did, but that I still tried to make them proud after everything. If you've ever given people too many chances, you already understand this pain. Don't just scroll, subscribe. Join people who've been through it too, because you deserve stories that make you feel seen. I ran toward the noise, heart hammering against my ribs. I found Seo-jun slumped against the very exit I told him to watch. The man in the gray coat was gone, but the message was left in the blood pooling on the white marble. Seo-jun looked at me, his face pale, his arrogance finally stripped away. You told me, he wheezed. I did, I said, kneeling beside him, my first aid training kicking in despite the anger boiling in my gut. But you were too busy owning me to actually listen to me. He didn't die that night, but the version of Min Seo-jun who thought he was untouchable definitely did. Watching a man who owns half the city struggle to breathe on a marble floor changes how you look at him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a jagged, raw vulnerability that made my stomach do somersaults. I spent the next 72 hours in a guest wing I wasn't allowed to leave, changing bandages and monitoring a fever that seemed determined to take him out. He wouldn't go to a hospital. He said hospitals were for people who wanted their enemies to know where to find them. Why did you stay? He asked me on the third night, his voice a dry rasp in the quiet room. He was propped up against the pillows, looking less like a monster and more like a man who had finally realized he was made of glass and bone just like the rest of us. I have a nursing degree, Seo-jun, I said, wringing out a cool cloth. And despite what you think, I don't actually enjoy watching people bleed out, even the ones who buy my freedom without asking. He reached out, his fingers brushing my wrist, a touch that wasn't a command for the first time. It was a question. He realized that my intuition, the way I saw the man in the gray coat before anyone else, was a strategic asset he had been too blind to use. He didn't just want me as a waitress anymore. He wanted me at the table. There is a meeting tomorrow, he whispered, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. I need eyes that see what my men miss. I need you. You know what hurts the most? Not what they did, but that I still tried to make them proud after everything. If you've ever given people too many chances, you already understand this pain. Don't just scroll, subscribe. Join people who've been through it too, because you deserve stories that make you feel seen. I nodded, even though every instinct told me to run. I was trading my safety for a seat at a very dangerous table, and I knew there was no going back once the door clicked shut. The meeting wasn't in a boardroom. It was in a dimly lit basement of a building that didn't exist on any map. I sat behind Seo-jun, dressed in a suit he provided, playing the part of the silent assistant while my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Across from us sat a man who looked far too kind to be in a place like this. His name was Jin-ho, a former associate who now ran the northern docks, and the air between him and Seo-jun was thick enough to choke on. Seo-jun was playing it cool, but I could see the slight tension in his jaw that meant he was still in pain. Jin-ho noticed it too. He kept smiling, but his eyes never left the bandage hidden under Seo-jun's shirt. You're getting slow, Seo-jun, Jin-ho said, leaning back. Or maybe you're just distracted by your new acquisition. He looked at me, and for a second, I felt like a bug under a microscope. Later that night, as I walked toward the car, a shadow detached itself from the brick wall. It was Jin-ho. He didn't have a weapon, just a slip of paper and a look of genuine pity. He's never going to let you go, Jasmine, he said, his voice low. He doesn't protect things, he hoards them. If you want a way out, a real way out, call this number. I can get you to Detroit by sunrise. I looked at the paper, then back at the black sedan where Seo-jun was waiting, watching us through the tinted glass. Jin-ho was offering me a door to my old life, but I knew nothing was ever free in this world. I had to choose between the man who owned my present and a stranger who promised a future that sounded too good to be true. When I finally stood my ground, they called me heartless. But tell me, where were they when I was breaking? If you've ever had to choose peace over people, this channel is your space. Subscribe, not for me, but for every quiet soul who took their power back. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket, my mind a storm of questions I wasn't ready to answer yet. I always thought Min Seo-jun was made of stone, but I found out he actually has a heartbeat. He just hides it behind steel doors. One rainy afternoon, he didn't take me to a meeting or a restaurant. He drove me to a quiet, private medical facility on the edge of the city. He didn't say a word as we walked through the halls, his hand tight on my arm, not like a captor, but like a man who was afraid of falling. Inside a sunlit room sat a young woman who looked just like him, but her eyes were vacant, staring at a world only she could see. "This is Minna," he whispered, his voice cracking for the first time. "My sister." He sat by her bed and held her hand with a tenderness that made my chest ache. He told me she was attacked because of a mistake he made years ago, a betrayal he never saw coming. In that moment, I realized his obsession with controlling me wasn't just about power, it was about his crushing fear of failing to protect someone again. He wasn't just a boss, he was a brother who had lost everything that mattered. I saw the cracks in his armor, and for a second, I forgot to be afraid of him. I saw a man who was just as trapped as I was, held hostage by his own guilt. Before I even tell you what happened next, let me ask you this. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted most? If you have, you'll feel this story deep in your soul. And if you know that kind of pain, hit subscribe. Not because it helps me, but because stories like this remind us that sometimes silence and strength are the best revenge. Seo-jun didn't waste any time testing my loyalty after that visit. He called me into his office the next morning and handed me a leather folder. Inside was a photo of Jin-ho, the man who had offered me a way out at the docks. Seo-jun didn't look at me as he spoke. He just stared out the window at the city he thought he owned. "He's moving against me," Jasmine, Seo-jun said, his voice cold again, the tenderness from the hospital gone. "I need you to meet him. Tell him you want to take his offer. Tell him you're ready to leave tonight." My heart stopped. He was asking me to be a double agent, to walk into the lion's den with nothing but a wire and a prayer. "You're asking me to lie for you," I said, my voice steady despite the terror rising in my throat. "I'm asking you to protect us," he corrected, finally turning to look at me. I had to choose, help the man who had locked me in a cage but showed me his soul, or trust a stranger who promised freedom but might be leading me into a different kind of trap. My self-respect was screaming at me to walk away, but my gut told me that in this world, there are no clean hands. I took the folder and walked out, knowing that I was no longer just a waitress or a guest. I was a pawn in a game I didn't fully understand, and one wrong move would mean I'd never see my sister in Detroit again. Trust in this world isn't a gift, it's a death sentence if you give it to the wrong person. After Seo-jun handed me that folder, he didn't just send me out into the cold. He brought me into the one room in his house that didn't have a camera, a small, dusty library filled with books that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. He sat me down and told me about the night his father died. He described the face of the man who pulled the trigger, a man he had called an uncle for 20 years. "I don't trust people, Jasmine," he said, his eyes fixed on a spot on the wall. "I trust leverage. I trust fear. But I'm realizing that those things don't keep you warm at night." It was a lesson in the high cost of his life. He was revealing his deepest scars to show me why he clung to me so tightly. He wasn't just sent to protect me, he was desperate for one thing in his life that wasn't bought or forced. But the weight of his honesty felt like another set of chains. I was becoming the keeper of his secrets, and in his world, that made me a target for everyone who wanted him gone. I looked at him and saw the lonely boy behind the monster, but I couldn't forget that he still had a wire in his hand, waiting for me to go meet Jin-ho. He was opening his heart while still using me as a shield. It made me wonder if he even knew the difference between love and survival anymore. The next day, my phone buzzed with a notification that shouldn't have been possible. It was a message from a burner number, a code only my sister, Maya, and I knew from when we were kids in Detroit. "Are you okay? People are asking questions. Don't come home." My blood turned to ice. I hadn't spoken to her in months, and now the violence of my new life was reaching out to touch the only person I had left. I had to make a choice that felt like cutting off a limb. If I responded, Seo-jun's software would flag the location. If I stayed silent, Maya would think I was dead or worse. I stood in the bathroom of the restaurant, staring at the screen, realizing that Seo-jun's protection was exactly what was putting her in danger. My silence was her safety, but it was also my slow social suicide. I tucked the phone away, my chest tight with a pain I couldn't voice. I had to play the part of the loyal soldier while my own family was being hunted because of the man I was starting to care for. The contrast was enough to make me sick. I was living in a penthouse while she was looking over her shoulder in a dorm room. You know what hurts the most? Not what they did, but that I still tried to make them proud after everything. If you've ever given people too many chances, you already understand this pain. Don't just scroll, subscribe. Join people who've been through it too, because you deserve stories that make you feel seen. I walked back out to the floor, ready to meet Jin-ho, knowing that if I failed tonight, Maya would be the one to pay the price for my mistakes. I didn't realize how much of a trophy I had become until Seo-jun sat me at a table surrounded by men who looked at me like I was a piece of expensive art he hadn't finished paying for yet. This was a formal dinner for his top associates, and I was expected to play the part of the quiet, loyal woman by his side. One of them, a man named Kang who had been Seo-jun's right hand for years, kept leaning over to whisper things that made my skin crawl. He asked me how much a girl from the streets of Detroit costs these days, and if Seo-jun had already gotten bored of my little act. I looked at Seo-jun, waiting for him to shut it down, but he just kept cutting his steak, his face a mask of cold indifference. It was a test of my self-respect. I realized then that in this room, my voice didn't matter unless it served his image. Kang reached out to touch my shoulder, and I didn't wait for permission. I stood up, knocked my wine glass over directly onto his expensive silk lapel, and walked out without looking back. I spent the rest of the night in the garden, shivering in the cold air, realizing that being protected by a mafia boss often feels exactly like being erased. When Seo-jun finally came out, he didn't apologize. He just handed me his coat and told me I had made a scene. I realized then that he cared more about the respect of monsters than the dignity of the woman who saved his life. You know what hurts the most? Not what they did, but that I still tried to make them proud after everything. If you've ever given people too many chances, you already understand this pain. Don't just scroll, subscribe. Join people who've been through it too, because you deserve stories that make you feel seen. Trust is a fragile thing, and Seo-jun shattered mine with a single phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. He had promised me months ago that my old coworkers from Murphy's Diner were safe, that he had given them enough money to start over far away from the city's reach. But while I was searching for a charger in his study, I heard him talking to Marcus. He wasn't talking about their retirement. He was talking about their relocation to a warehouse on the outskirts of town where they were being forced to work off a debt they never owed. The man I was starting to love was the same man who had turned my friends into prisoners just to keep me isolated. I felt like I was suffocating. Every meal he bought me, every piece of jewelry he slid onto my wrist, it all felt like blood money. He had lied to my face while looking me in the eye, and the worst part was that he thought he was doing me a favor by cleaning up my past. When I finally stood my ground, they called me heartless. But tell me, where were they when I was breaking? If you've ever had to choose peace over people, this channel is your space. Subscribe, not for me, but for every quiet soul who took their power back. I didn't confront him that night. I just sat in my room, staring at the surveillance camera, and started planning my own version of the truth. I realized that if I wanted to be free, I couldn't wait for him to give me the keys. I had to become the person he was most afraid of, someone who knew exactly who he was and still chose to leave. I decided to stop being a ghost in my own life on a rainy Monday night. I didn't ask for the car and I didn't check in with the guards. I just grabbed my jacket, walked out the front door, and took the subway to a dive bar in a neighborhood where the streetlights have been dead for years. I needed to see if the leash was as long as he claimed, or if I was still just a pet he kept on a short chain. I sat at the bar and ordered a cheap beer, the kind that tastes like metal and bad decisions, waiting for the inevitable vibration in my pocket. It took 47 minutes. When the phone rang, I didn't answer. I just watched it glow on the sticky wood of the bar top. He didn't call again. Instead, 20 minutes later, the door opened and Min Seo-jun walked in alone. He wasn't wearing a suit. He looked tired, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. He didn't yell. He didn't drag me out. He just sat on the stool next to me and ordered a drink. "Is this what you wanted?" he asked, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "To see if I'd come find you?" "I wanted to see if I still had the right to be nowhere," I told him. I looked at him, searching for the anger, but all I found was a strange kind of exhaustion. He told me that if I really wanted to leave, he'd let me go, but it would kill him to watch me walk away into a world that didn't know how to keep me safe. It was the first time I realized that his need for control wasn't just about me, it was his only way of showing he cared. A week later, I found the one place where Min Seo-jun isn't a ghost or a king. I followed him on a Saturday morning, expecting a secret meeting or a drop-off, but he ended up at a run-down animal shelter on the edge of the industrial district. I watched through a cracked window as the man who orders hits and moves millions sat on a concrete floor, covered in dog hair, laughing as a one-eared pit bull licked his face. The staff called him David. They had no idea who he really was. I walked in, and the look of pure shock on his face was worth more than all the jewelry he'd ever bought me. He tried to stumble into his boss persona, but it's hard to look dangerous when you're holding a squeaky toy. He confessed that he'd been coming here for 3 years because the dogs didn't care about his name or his money. They just cared that he showed up. It was a side of him he'd kept buried deeper than any of his business secrets. It made me realize that we were both playing parts. He was playing the monster to survive his world, and I was playing the victim to survive mine. Sitting there among the barking dogs, I saw a path forward that didn't involve cages or surveillance. We were just two broken people trying to find a version of ourselves that didn't involve looking over our shoulders. When I finally stood my ground, they called me heartless. But tell me, where were they when I was breaking? If you've ever had to choose peace over people, this channel is your space. Subscribe, not for me, but for every quiet soul who took their power back. I never thought I'd be the one holding the match, but sometimes you have to burn your own house down just to see who's hiding in the shadows. Jin-ho, the man who promised me a clean escape to Detroit, finally called to collect. He didn't want to save me. He wanted me to poison Seo-jun's transition of power by planting a drive in the private server room. He threatened to send his men to my sister's dorm if I didn't comply. Suddenly, the mafia tactics I hated weren't just something I watched from the sidelines, they were the only language I had left to speak. I stood in the dark hallway of the penthouse, the weight of the drive in my pocket feeling like a lead weight. I could betray the man who owned my life to save the person who gave it meaning. But as I looked at the security camera, I realized I wasn't that girl from Murphy's Diner anymore. I didn't just plant the drive. I altered the data. I used the observation skills Seo-jun praised to set a trap for Jin-ho instead. I was becoming the very thing I feared, a person who moves people like chess pieces, all to keep the one thing that mattered safe. When I finally stood my ground, they called me heartless. But tell me, where were they when I was breaking? If you've ever had to choose peace over people, this channel is your space. Subscribe, not for me, but for every quiet soul who took their power back. The choice felt like losing a piece of my soul. I saved Maya, but I did it by becoming a monster. I realized that in Seo-jun's world, you don't stay clean, you just choose which kind of dirt you can live with. Freedom doesn't always feel like a victory. Sometimes it feels like a cold breeze in an empty room. 3 days after Jin-ho was dealt with, Seo-jun called me into his study. He didn't have a drink in his hand, and he wasn't looking at his monitors. He pushed a leather folder across the desk. Inside was a passport, a bank card with my name on it, and the deed to a small house in a quiet suburb 3 hours away. No strings. No cameras. No protection I didn't ask for. "You're free, Jasmine," he said, his voice so quiet I almost missed it. I realized that if I have to keep you in a cage to love you, then I don't really love you at all. I love the control. And I'm tired of being that man. I looked at the exit, then back at him. For months, this was all I wanted, but now that the door was wide open, my feet wouldn't move. I had spent so much time fighting his world that I forgot how to live in my own. He told me he'd be at the shelter on Saturday if I decided I still wanted to talk, but he wouldn't come looking for me this time. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing I'd ever felt. I walked out of that building with my bags packed and a car waiting that I actually owned. I drove for 2 hours, waiting for the black sedan to appear in my rearview mirror, waiting for the tracking software to beep. Nothing happened. For the first time since that rainy Tuesday night, I was just Jasmine Washington again. But as I pulled into a gas station, I realized that being alone didn't feel like peace. It felt like I was missing the only person who truly saw the fire inside me. The hardest part about getting everything you ever wanted is realizing you're the only person left to share it with. I sat in that new house for 3 days, staring at the walls, waiting for a camera to blink or a phone to buzz with a command. Nothing. The silence was louder than any shout Seo-jun had ever aimed at me. I was Jasmine Washington again, with a bank account that said I was set for life and a heart that felt like an empty room. I had fought so hard to break his grip that I didn't notice I had started reaching back for him. I drove to the animal shelter on Saturday morning, not because I had to, but because I needed to know if David still existed without me. He was there, sitting on the same concrete floor, but he wasn't laughing today. He looked like a man who had accepted his sentence. I didn't say a word. I just sat down next to him and started brushing the same one-eared dog. We sat there for an hour in the sun, two people who had stripped away the titles, the power, and the cages until there was nothing left but the truth. "I don't want to be protected, Seo-jun," I said, my voice finally steady. "And I don't want to be owned. But I don't want to be without you either." He didn't look at me, but his hand found mine in the dirt. He told me that if we did this, it would be as equals. No more monitors. No more lies about my friends. We were going to build something that didn't require a gilded cage to survive. It was the most dangerous choice I'd ever made, choosing to love a man whose world was a minefield, but for the first time, it was my choice. Sometimes revenge isn't about payback, it's about peace. And if this story touched you, subscribe right now. Because somewhere out there, another person is watching in silence, needing a reminder that they're not alone, and your one click might help them find it. Real love stories aren't about perfect people finding each other. They're about complicated people choosing to become better together. Do you think a love built on a cage can ever truly be free? Stick around, because the next chapter of this life is one you won't want to miss.